When you hear ray tracing, you think of 400-watt desktop GPUs, massive tower PCs, and uncompromising visual fidelity. But what if I told you this little 35-watt handheld could achieve it too? For months, the internet has claimed this is impossible. Today, we're here to debunk that myth. We're going to prove that handhelds can not only manage ray tracing, but they should be embracing it. Let's dive in. So we will begin by testing this out across a few different games. But first, let's answer a fundamental question. Why do people believe this can't happen? The reason is quite simple. It's not supposed to. I don't mean to laugh, but seriously, we are talking about a 30-watt to 35-watt maximum wattage pool. And you're asking it to run a game, manage an operating system, bounce light rays around, and do it all fast enough for a smooth experience. Keep in mind that, as I mentioned before, a standard desktop graphics card with its dedicated ray tracing accelerators draws anywhere from 300 to 450 watts on its own. This fact is a hard pill for a PC handheld to swallow. To me, however, that power draw isn't even the biggest challenge. The real obstacle is the human eye and effectively demonstrating the benefit. I read countless comments daily arguing that ray tracing adds minimum value to a game, when objectively, a difference is clearly present. The issue with the difference is that its impact varies dramatically from game to game. If you don't find it worthwhile in your favorite title, you certainly won't find it beneficial in a game you rarely play. Therefore, the degree of integration for ray tracing and how vast and immersive its effects are is ultimately what will determine whether or not it should be enabled or disabled. My goal is not only to prove that ray tracing is a functional option on handheld devices, but also to provide key insights into what makes it valuable on these devices, even when the visual difference is subtle. The first thing you must always remember is that some games are built from the ground up with ray tracing. Regardless of whether you believe it's active, it is running and already introducing you to the technology without your knowledge. I can highlight a few games where I felt ray tracing created optimized situations on a handheld. The first that came to mind was Doom: The Dark Ages. The game perfectly encapsulates maximum optimization. Id Software left no crumb on the table. They meticulously maxed out every setting and component. So when someone asks if you can do ray tracing on a handheld, I can definitively say yes, because this game runs quite well with ray tracing and it's a requirement. If you enable the handheld options at 1600 by 1000 resolution with a 30-watt TDP, you're looking at around 45 FPS. If you drop it to 800p, you're approaching 60 FPS. That's a 60 FPS ray traced handheld experience that's only drawing 35 TDP. And I'm not even maxing out the wattage. It is truly crazy when you really think about it. If Doom: The Dark Ages can achieve that in a semi-open world setting, the opportunity for success here is undeniable. The bottom line, this isn't about hitting 4K at 120 FPS. It's about viability. It's about getting shadows that look right and reflections that feel grounded, all while sipping on power. It's hard work for developers, but when they build it right, this little handheld is ready to shine. We are showing that the future isn't just about massive power draw, it's about smart power draw. So as you can see, this is an example of ray tracing done correctly. On the opposite side of that spectrum was Borderlands 4, though, which eventually managed to turn its performance around. Ray tracing is required in that game as well, and we are finally able to get a solid 30 to 40 FPS on the handheld. This game initially gave non-ray tracing players all the ammunition they needed for their internet crusade. The most glaring issue was that Borderlands always looked great, and its cel-shaded approach didn't fundamentally need ray tracing, completely diminishing the feature's perceived value in the eyes of the average player. This caused a huge backlash because taxing a game's performance for a feature that doesn't showcase impressive results only deepens a player's aversion to that feature. This level of variation is precisely why we continue to hear the argument that ray tracing isn't needed, even when it's clearly a superior approach to modern graphics. As developers begin to align clarity and ray tracing, making them inseparable, and NVIDIA is very close to this in my opinion, the debate will begin to die out. However, the value of ray tracing should not be misunderstood. It is worth enabling if the hardware overhead is available. So let's go find some games that feature ray tracing but were never intended to run on a handheld. I think Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is a prime candidate. This game already struggles to run without ray tracing, but I wanted to truly push the device to its limits with a title whose developers never once considered a handheld would run it. This is a scenario where we can truly discover the value. What I did was establish my baseline where we would normally be with optimized settings. Yes, it's still a 30 FPS target for me. The game is inherently heavy. I wanted to see if I could pull off running a heavy game with ray tracing. Spoiler alert, I got it done. This was achieved with the help of the Z2 Extreme and kept for optimizations on the Xbox Ally. Unfortunately, the Legion Go 2 was a bit unsteady on that 30 FPS target, fluctuating down to 27, 28, and 29 FPS, which doesn't feel good. We had plenty of headroom on the Xbox Ally X though. This difference could possibly be attributed to the 1280 by 720 resolution versus the 1280 by 800p on the Legion Go 2. But honestly, that's typically only a one frame difference, never a major deal or a game changer. But I felt it was worth mentioning, so you guys can have that. We were seeing around 36, 37 FPS on the Xbox Ally X and around 30, 31 FPS on the Legion Go 2. But again, when things got graphically intensive, you would observe a performance dip below that. The key takeaway, though, is that it's viable. Not only is it viable, but it actually ran okay. We had high ray trace shadows and medium global illumination. This is where I attempt to provide context and value to a victory that is visually difficult to showcase. This game was designed to run on a PS5 with minimal or no dedicated hardware accelerators, meaning the ray tracing effect will be very well optimized and involve a culmination of multiple effects to present a valuable visual outcome. Adjusting one setting won't impact performance as much as you actually think. We still ran it with a decent settings, but with one key compromise: resolution. If you consider what is actually being achieved, it makes sense why the resolution is the primary factor providing the necessary overhead for these ray tracing effects. Similar to the PS5, there is a CPU bottleneck. The GPU has always been capable, but it's required an injection of CPU power to handle these additional functions. Given that both the PS5 and the Z2 Extreme utilize an APU, you start to understand the type of high quality ray tracing you can achieve. This also reintroduces that spectrum I mentioned earlier regarding how users might view these incremental visual upgrades as underwhelming, because regardless of what we assume, Ratchet and Clank likely started development without ray tracing, and the feature was introduced in the later stages to work with some of the PS5's new capabilities, resulting in a more subtle approach than, say, a game like Black Myth Wukong. As you can see, reflections do appear, shadows definitely fare better, and the global illumination grounds the world much more effectively than when it's off. But again, we're discussing subtleties that the average person isn't analyzing closely. Thus, the value of the ray tracing stems from the development side, requiring less manual work on lighting, and for us, the end user, it has to be integrated from the ground up. That is where you genuinely see its worth. At some point, though, ray tracing won't even be an optional setting. It will simply be required to reach the level of visual fidelity we currently expect. So that's how I want you to consider the potential in which games you might run where you'll see true value. The Sony suite, Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, Miles Morales, you will find value in that ray tracing, but it's also going to be subtle, and most people may dismiss it. Then you return to the Doom the Dark Ages conversation where the entire game was architected around it. You can clearly see the value in the world, how grounded it feels, the vast indirect lighting, and how smoothly it runs. because the feature was considered from the start. I believe that with careful optimization and strong effective upscaling, something similar to the recently announced FSR4, you'll be able to run these games at 720p or 800p, upscale them to 1080p, and retain those valuable features we've discussed. Granted, FSR is a demanding algorithm, but as APUs are released with dedicated hardware accelerators, you'll realize this won't be a non-viable option for long. I find this development encouraging. I find ray tracing on handhelds fascinating, and it's only going to improve from here. One thing that genuinely caught me by surprise, though, was that the Legion Go S was simply incapable of running any game with ray tracing. Every title I tried basically denied it. Honestly, I'm not sure if that's the case on the Z1 Extreme for Windows. I'm almost certain there is potential for those games to run some form of ray tracing, but for whatever reason, it was completely blocked for me on Ratchet and Clank and Pragmata. I must assume there is a game out there that can run ray tracing on the Z1 Extreme on the Legion Go S. I have yet to find it though. When I do, I'll be sure to test it again. But as of now, there is a clear distinction between SteamOS and Windows regarding the allowance of ray tracing, as I don't believe the Z1 Extreme and Z2 Extreme differ significantly in their ray tracing capabilities. Speaking of Pragmata, let's discuss it. This game is very new and very recent, and we were able to successfully pull off ray tracing similar to titles like Resident Evil Requiem. We managed this because these games are extremely well optimized. You can perceive the value, and the presentation is significantly better. This is another instance of excellent implementation where the developer was considering ray tracing throughout the entire development process, and implementation was thoroughly planned, not merely tacked on as an afterthought. This is why scalability and optimization are crucial, and it begins with the developer. The function of ray tracing has always been and will always be heavy, but we have clearly seen implementations that make it seem otherwise. The hardware didn't suddenly improve. It was a conscious decision to create and build for the lower end specifications. So I know we often claim PC is master race, etc., but we clearly have to thank devices like the Switch 2, the Xbox Series S, even the PS4 for pushing the developers to think ahead. The viability of ray tracing on the Switch 2 and Series S is incredible to even talk about, but it exists and it will only continue to benefit us. So thank you, Nintendo and Xbox. To wrap this all up, is ray tracing viable on handhelds? Yes, but only when a developer builds the house around the feature, not when they just tack it on. Games like Doom the Dark Ages and Pragmata show us the future, and thanks to upscaling tech and dedicated accelerators, that future is arriving faster than anyone thought. I find this to be encouraging. I find ray tracing on handhelds to be interesting, and it's only going to get better from here, so stay tuned because I plan to be here every step of the way for it. Thank you all for watching and tuning in. Let me know what you guys think about the value of ray tracing and what are some of your games that you like to turn on ray tracing effects for in the comment sections below. As always, I appreciate the support, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.